Hey, y'all. Sorry I've been kind of irregular in posting on this particular series. This series is meant to equip people for tracking the General Conference, the Convening Conference of the Global Methodist Church. It's coming up in September, but we're just closing a few weeks ago the General Conference from the United Methodist Church, where a ton of us came from. And there are all kinds of other large gatherings going on this summer. It's a huge year for a number of things. September is going to be the convening General Conference for the Global Methodist Church. As of this week, we just heard that the Ivory Coast Annual Conference is leaving the United Methodist Church and going through a long process to detach. Maybe we'll join the GMC, but we do know that Tanzania, Central African Republic, and Peru. Is it Peru? No. It's that Central American country. I'm forgetting it. Forgive me. But there are 3 new annual conferences that are coming into the GMC. So a lot of movement going on right now. TJ and I did not record one of these last week, as was our original intention, because we were actually submitting petitions for the consideration of the legislative committees in the lead up to General Conference. So, TJ, anything to be said about the petition drafting process?
Glad it's over with. We got it done. I mean, it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. I thought it was going to be more intense and like, oh, you got to have all of these things and make sure the formatting's just right. And now they're pretty gracious about it, I think. We didn't get any pushback like, hey, you did this wrong.
Yeah, I haven't gotten anything from the guy in charge of it, so I'm under the impression we did a perfect job.
Yeah, I think, well, perfect, hopefully. But, I mean, if anything's wrong, it sounds like they're going to work to, like, get it set the way it needs to. So,
yeah.
Appreciate that.
Before, I have some stuff. I didn't tell you about this email I got, by the way, that answered some of the questions that we had from last time. But before we get to that, I did want to show people this petitions process that we went through. We needed 10 people to sign on to each one for us. We ended up drafting 8 of our own, plus a resolution. I don't even know if they're accepting resolutions, but I made one. And then we, to get signatures, we directed people to go and fill out this form and sign on. So what you should see is my screen with a final report on what was submitted, and you'll see that 102 people ended up coming and responding, which would be great. But like 12% of those people were not GMC. They just wanted to see what was going on there. So even so, we did get our 10 signatures on everything. And so the first 2 signatures had to do with whether or not candidates for ordained ministry could be presented as a crew or one-on-one, and it stipulates only one at a time. Then we had an open meetings one, large support for that, a little bit less for minimum standards for annual conference websites, a lot of support for financial transparency, not as much support for capping denominational salaries, but I'll do a unit on that and why I think that's important, how I thought through that. A lot of support for banning regional conferences, a little bit less, but still a lot of support for banning ethnically based conferences. And then this was not my petition, but I'm interviewing the guy who presented this petition, Chase Robinson, I think is his name is. I'm interviewing him tomorrow. So we're going to talk through the language here. And then this sexuality position, more people disliked than liked. It had pretty strong language about divorce. I think that was the main reason why.
Yeah, that was the thing that I pulled from it. I was going to read back over it, but I figured that was what it was. Most people are okay with clergy being previously divorced and then remarrying, which that's a whole video we can go over. But that was the difference between that petition and the next guest petition, both of which are not ours, but we throw them in there to see what
the next one was my brother's, and a lot more people liked that one, even though it was also kind of hardcore.
It was, but I don't think it said anything as much about divorce, if divorce at all. I don't remember.
Yeah, I don't remember either. So, maybe we'll go through that. Then he also drafted one on church discipline, but we put that in late, so that's why only 13 responses. But it had to do with a little bit a harsher tone in exercising church discipline with disorderly walkers, people.
Yeah, I read that. I glanced over that before I threw it in there, and I don't remember it.
Yeah, I mean, it is pretty milquetoast. I mean, pretty biblically basic, but
Yeah.
it kind of goes against Methodist niceness culture.
Yeah.
So, and then the only other thing was my resolution on the racial theology of the GMC, and that got some pushback, but most people really thought it was a good attempt. So we got a bunch of responses from people that we've read over, but we need to process more. So anyway, just want to thank those of you who took the time to do that. If you didn't take the time to do that, but you'd like to give us your feedback on those and read through them, then we will have the link to that form that you can fill out with this video. I want to get as much feedback and engagement as possible. So
Yeah, it's still open. I wasn't going to take it down or anything, so that link still should work.
perfect. All right, so the other thing that I wanted to cover before we get into this document, we ran into a number of questions last week that I don't think he asked me to. He didn't ask me to protect his name. Clark Atkins wrote me an email. I'm not going to put it on screen because he didn't give me permission. He doesn't want his email out here. He said, I have been elected a delegate to the upcoming convening general conference of the GMC. I'm an elder in Arkansas, part of the Trinity Conference. So one of the questions you and TJ raised was how many delegates there would be. There will be a total of between 350 and 360 delegates. The first allocation, which happened in March, allocated 260 delegates to the provisional annual conferences and provisional districts in existence as of March 1st. There will be a second allocation after June 1st of approximately an additional 100 delegates. So I was wrong. I thought they were going to double it, but no, they're just adding 100. These have been reserved for conferences, districts, and churches coming in after the first allocation. If there is not a need for all 100 delegates, then existing conferences and districts will get some additional delegates based on the same formula used in the first allocation. So with Tanzania coming on board, and especially the Central African Republic, I'm thinking that those 100 delegates are going to be taken up just fine. All right, he also said there was a question regarding the work of the legislative committees. Those committees will be formed in June. So we were wondering if they were only going to get together, like with the UMC, I think they got together just on site. But with the GMC, he's saying they get together 2 months beforehand. July, August, September, 2.5 months ahead of time.
Okay.
They will meet online throughout the summer in advance of the convening conference. They will work on petitions submitted prior to the May 23rd deadline, unlike the United Methodist Church's General Conference, which did most of their legislative committee work in the first week of their conference. The bulk of ours, as I understand it, will be done in advance. One of the reasons for the May 23rd deadline is to give the petition secretary time to ensure all petitions are translated into the recognized languages. There will be 6 or 7 prior to the committees beginning their work in late June. So they're going to be doing a lot more advanced work than the delegates to the United Methodist Church. I think that's really wise.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But it's also for being able to get the translated material out early for the consideration of all the delegates, which I think is pretty common sense, slam dunk.
Yeah.
All right, so then he said there was a third thing that he talked about. There is a petitions committee that has been or will be established by the Transitional Leadership Committee to work with the petitions secretary, I think that's Lamar, what's his name, to evaluate submitted petitions to forward to the proper legislative committee for consideration. They will also work with petitioners or similar petitions to perhaps combine their work so as to cut down on several duplicate or near duplicate petitions being considered. If there are any petitions dealing with paragraphs that are not open during this convening conference, they will flag those and hold them for referral either at a later general conference or for consideration by the convening conference if there is a 2/3 majority wishing to open that paragraph. Although this is me, not him. As I recall, they're not going to translate the petitions that are outside of the areas of concern for this one.
Okay. And we had I think there were 3 of them.
Yeah.
That weren't specifically being addressed. We submitted them anyways. So that'll be up to the general conference whether they want to look at those. I'm trying to remember what they were. I think salaries. No, I think salaries was...
See, this was one of those things I never really had the patience for figuring out, what sections we could critique and which sections we couldn't, I just wrote the things that it came to me and seemed like, hey, we should have this figured out on the front end. But we should look at if we're serious, we should look at getting them translated if they were not going to get translated on their own, so that we can just circulate them beforehand, so that everybody knows what they are. No, you don't like that idea.
I guess. I mean, if people are interested in them.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Why wouldn't they be? I mean, that's the whole point of this thing is figuring out the covenant we're going to share in the game.
Yeah, I guess in my head, if people are interested in them and they don't speak English, just Google Translate. Just go translate it. Copy paste. I don't know. You're not okay with that idea.
It's just, if, I think, I don't know how many of them know about Google Translate.
Other conferences that don't speak English probably don't know about Google Translate.
I mean, I have hardly anyone who is from who doesn't already speak English who writes me, who uses any translating function. It just...
Well, yeah, because I mean, if they don't speak English, why are they watching your videos? Because they're all in English. I don't think YouTube translates them.
I write articles as well and stuff. They could hypothetically copy and paste and translate that. So
I guess. I don't know. I'm not going to know about some guy in another country that doesn't speak English that is doing all this stuff. So I don't know.
We'll see. I'm inclined to think that what we've put forward is worthy, but if we want 2/3 of the assembly to vote in favor of it, or to vote to consider it, then they need to know what it is beforehand. And I'm not sure what percentage speaks English.
I don't know. I don't know.
All right. Well, anything else to be said before we get into the document?
What was his name?
Who's
that
him?
Sent you that email?
Who? Oh, his name is Clark Atkins.
Thank you, Clark.
Yes. All right. We are on page... I'll direct you now to my screen. We're on page 5. We're in. We stopped at point D, membership on legislative committees.
I believe so. So we just went through all of the legislative committees that are going to be. Those are the ones that are going to be established in June. Is that what you just said?
Yeah.
Okay. So we went over the specifics of those, what paragraphs they address. So. Yeah, right at the end of its membership on the legislative committees.
All right, well, why don't you read that first, and then I'll take over.
Okay, so D on page 5. Within each annual conference delegation, each delegate may indicate their first, second, and third preferences for which legislative committee on which to serve. Membership of each legislative committee will be determined by the Transitional Commission on the Convening General Conference or its designee, based on the preferences of the delegates, the minimum and maximum numbers of committee members, and the need for geographical diversity.
Okay. Anything to say about any of that?
No. So the delegates that are, I say no, and then I'm going to say something anyways. The delegates that are nominated to go to the General Conference, they will make up these legislative committees, and the Transitional Commission on the Convening General Conference is going to be determining who gets on those committees.
Yeah, they get to say, here's the ones I want to be on, first, second, third pick, and then there's a central decider who decides who actually goes on what committee.
Okay. Yeah, there's nothing else to say about that then.
Okay. Point E, procedures for legislative committees. So this, point 1 is pre-conference meetings. Legislative committees will meet virtually during the 90 days prior to the convening General Conference to begin work on petitions and topics assigned to them. That blue underline shows that I read that, and then I forgot that.
I mean, this is a lot. We just went through the Book of Discipline. We started the JPP and then realized that, this is coming up. We should do this first. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, we've been through a lot of documents. And then you went through the whole General Conference of the UMC. Mm-hmm. It's been a busy last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So
thank you for making excuses for me. I appreciate that. Okay. The work of legislative committees meeting prior to the convening of the General Conference must be completed 7 days before the opening session. No later than 60 days prior to the convening of the General Conference, each legislative committee will meet electronically to elect officers, introduce members to one another, and set the agenda for their pre-conference meetings. So this is just explaining the workflow. We've got the deadline for submitting petitions. Then we've got all the delegates saying what committees they want to be on. The Transitional Commission on the convening General Conference then decides who's on what legislative committees. Mm-hmm. Then at least 60 days beforehand, I guess all the petitions have already been translated. You can finally get the legislative committees together. They figure out who's in charge and the order of business that they're going to do in the lead up to General Conference.
That's what it sounds like.
Okay, then I'm not too tired yet today. Point 2, committee officers. The initial meeting will be presided over by an active or senior bishop. So there are going to be, do you remember how many legislative committees there are?
7.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay. So at each of these 7 committee meetings, the very first one is going to be led by a bishop. Subsequent meetings will be presided over by the elected committee officers. Each committee will elect from within its membership a chair, vice chair, and secretary, as well as any subcommittee officers if such are needed. Election is by simple majority, and it is hoped that leadership will be reflective of the global and diverse nature of the church. The Transitional Commission on the Convening General Conference will provide training to the legislative committee officers once they are elected and prior to the committees beginning their regular virtual meetings. So immediately I'm thinking about how logistically complicated it's going to be whenever you have delegates from all over the world. It's one thing if you've got a big formal gathering with translators. Mm-hmm. It's another thing if you're just saying, hey, we're going to work together for 60 days. Well, 53 days because it has to be concluded 6 days before the conference begins, or 7. But we've got this much time to cover this much territory, but you're not going to have official translators for every Zoom meeting between. So they're going to have to figure out either some AI to use or do they have something like that to like interpret? I feel like they do, or at least my iPhone does, where somebody could be speaking another language and it listens and it translates for me in text or something.
There might be, but I don't know if I'd like trust it. I feel like it's a little too early for that. Like, yeah, it's probably going to do a good part of it, but it's probably still going to mess up.
Well, I don't know how they can do the work and have everybody represented and contributing to the conversation, and they're not doing something like that.
So if they've already elected the people, they mm-hmm. know who doesn't speak English, and they're just going to have to get them a translator, I guess. Or ideally, those central conferences would have a translator on hand for the ones that don't speak English.
So you think it's more realistic for them to find translators for these legislative meetings? I'm thinking it's more realistic that they help people navigate some software that translates for them. But yeah, when they're saying people need to be considered from all over the world for these positions, then I'm hearing they need to be open to having committee chairs, vice chairs, secretaries that don't even speak English.
So I guess what's the majority makeup of the committee look like? If it's majority English speaking, then by default it's easier to go with English.
But then you have the same, the frustration will be the United Methodist Church always ran roughshod over non-English speakers because they were in the majority. And so that's probably going to happen. I mean, so like, okay, if I'm being optimistic, this puts them in a position to learn how to include people who don't speak English and like figure out how to communicate and not run roughshod over them. Either that, or if they don't do it well, then you got a bunch of delegates showing up that don't speak English and they've been just trampled throughout their legislative committee meetings, and then they're showing up mad because they just know they're going to be ignored just like at every other United Methodist General Conference.
Well, I guess if there are people that don't speak English on the committees, maybe the committee should take into account that they don't speak English and reserve like decision making until, like, record the meeting, have somebody translate it, like have a translator on hand, so they can go back over it, make sure they translated it right. give it to those people, and then make decisions after they've actually been informed well enough.
So they're not going to realistically be included in the dialogue and discernment, but they will be a part of the decision making whenever it comes time for a vote.
I think that logistically makes sense to me. Like, yeah, it's slightly it's inconvenient that not everybody speaks the same language, but short of taking a class on whatever common language that is, like, you're going to have to rely on a translator.
What was that language that was supposed to become a world language that they made up in the 90s? You don't remember? No. I'm wanting to say Etruscan. It's not Etruscan. It's, you never heard of this?
I guess not.
Okay.
I was born in 92, so if it was going on then, I don't know what this fad was.
I need to stop talking about it. Let's go on to point 3, parliamentarians. To the extent possible, each legislative committee will have a volunteer parliamentarian who will not be a general conference delegate. Interesting. The parliamentarians will attend all committee meetings, including virtual meetings in advance of the convening general conference, and advise the committee on the implementation of the covenant of our life together. What's that?
Is that the name of this document?
Oh, yeah, I think it is. And parliamentary procedure. Additionally, this person may train the committee members on basic committee procedures.
Yeah, that's the name of this document.
So when it's talking about parliamentary procedure, though, what I hear is Robert's rules.
Right.
And that, I don't know that I think one of the things that we've seen in the United Methodist Church is Robert's Rules of Order doesn't work well in a multilingual setting.
Well, it also doesn't work well for people that don't know it or understand it. Mm-hmm. So, like, what's the other option? Chaos?
So I think the other option, so they didn't use Robert's Rules of Order, I don't think, in early Methodist conferencing. I think they had a presiding bishop who then presented questions, led the conversation, and then said, if someone was talking too much, said, no more from you. I want to hear from this person over here, and then created a consensus over the course of the time they had together.
Which sounds good. It sounds good until, like, somebody says, oh, that's not fair, that person, that bishop decided that these people aren't going to get to speak. Like, if there's rules set down to what to do.
You already got that, though, with Robert's Rules.
What?
So the general conference for the UMC, I don't know if you saw this, it began, they were trying to figure out how they were going to run the conference, and somebody said, we need to be able to see the screen that the bishop sees whenever we're all signing up and there's a queue or a pool. We need to see what they see so we know that they're not practicing favoritism or manipulating the conversation.
Well, yeah, and they still manipulate the conversation because it's the UMC and the bishops are...
Well, that's what I'm saying is, like, there is no order thing that you can do where everybody's just like, oh, yeah, the person running it is not practicing any favoritism at all. It doesn't matter if you do Robert's Rules or not. And in fact, I'm a good libertarian. Libertarians argue that more regulation means more corruption because the people who know the system use it to benefit themselves. So just get rid of the system, have personalities, and that makes much more sense in a multilingual, multinational context.
I don't like it just because it sounds messy. It sounds messy.
Well, so what needs to happen? So what would have happened at this general conference in Charlotte if I was king? But it would have been, okay, we've heard a lot from Americans. We haven't heard but from 2 people in Uganda, and you guys are huge. We haven't heard from hardly anybody in Nigeria. Somebody from Nigeria, get up and speak to what's going on. Do you guys even understand what we're talking about right now? You don't understand what we're talking? Okay, well, we need to hold up. What do you guys need to understand? There was no work like that done. And so the Americans just ran roughshod over them because they're like, we're following our policy, keep up, and they couldn't. And so, I mean, that's what's going to happen with Robert's Rules.
I don't know.
This is what we get when we sign up
Robert's rules.
Learn Robert's Rules.
Yeah.
Learn English.
Well.
We run the world.
I wasn't going to go that far. But I'm not just talking about, like, non-English speak, like all of them. Like, I think after looking at the UMC, their general conference, it's clear that none of them have any idea how Robert's Rules work at all. They're just, like, getting up there and winging it, even though they had a parliamentarian that was supposed to tell them how to do stuff.
Yeah, one of the things you find about a parliamentarian is they still screw up all the time and get overwhelmed. But these people that are not familiar with Robert's rules are having conferences. They're having annual conference meetings. They're getting business done. They're figuring out how to do things. I just think maybe we operate within what we can imagine, and we're just not very imaginative. We don't realize, oh, there are other ways of doing things. There, and I can't speak in an informed way about how they do things, say, in Zimbabwe.
Sure well, obviously, they've got other ways of doing things. I'd be interested to see how these central conferences, how they have a conference just with themselves. But especially ones in Africa that don't all speak the same language.
Oh, sure.
That would be interesting to see if somebody's getting run over and ignored, or how that works.
All right, friends. Well, it sounds like if you know something, you need to write us at plainspokenpod@gmail.com. We're very interested in the answer to this question. And we know a lot of people care strongly about this because all the time we see Robert's Rules of Order. I mean, people hate it so much because it's used all the time. You're just going, this is getting unnecessarily complicated. And then it's just not fun. Anyway, we need to move on. Anything you want to say before we move on?
I don't think so.
Okay. All right. This is point 4, initial meeting introductions. Each member of the legislative committee must submit his or her written introduction to the General Conference Secretary's office not later than 72 hours before the initial scheduled committee meeting. This written introduction should include a picture, a brief summary of their history with the church, and areas of interest, experience, and expertise. The introduction should also indicate the person's interest in standing for election as a legislative committee officer. The Secretary's office will then send the written introductions of all the members to the committee prior to its initial meeting. At the start of the initial meeting of the committee, each committee member will introduce themselves by giving their name, place of residence, lay or clergy status, and provisional annual conference or district, and what pronouns they prefer.
I was going to say, if they include their pronouns, kick them out right off the bat. Like, don't even.
For those of you who are listening, I just added the pronouns at the end to trigger somebody, and I got at least one person.
Yeah.
So this is actually a really good idea as well, because it's so overwhelming to be in a meeting with a bunch of people you don't know and have never met. So this makes it so that before you even get together, everybody has had ample opportunity to explain themselves on the terms they're comfortable with and see everybody else on similar terms. You're not going to remember everything, but it's just, and ideally you have this stuff on hand so that whenever somebody's talking in your committee meeting, you can look them up and go, oh yeah, this guy or this gal.
Yeah, that makes sense. I like that. I mean, yeah, without that, then it's just a weird, awkward, unnecessary thing, I feel like.
Well, it benefits those who can operate on the fly better, but when you have a bunch of policy nerds, like a lot of these people are introverts and they need time to get acquainted with the material and the people beforehand if they're going to do well.
Do you think these people that are going to the general conference are introverts?
Oh yeah, a lot of them are. Yeah, a lot of them are like policy
That's an annual general conference. I think it's an annual conference.
Yeah, well, either way.
Whatever.
I mean, a lot of delegates are extroverts and they're people oriented, but a ton are like policy and structure oriented and theology oriented, and I love them, but I mean, they're just not like people persons,
I guess that makes sense.
Yeah. All right. Point 5, quorum. A quorum is required for any legislative committee discussion or action on any item of business. 1/2 of the membership of the committee constitutes a quorum in order to conduct business. A calling of the committee roll will occur before each committee may begin their business. A record of those present and absent is announced for the committee record at the start of each meeting by the chairperson or his or her designee. Proxy voting is not allowed. Okay. That makes sense to me.
Yeah, you got to have at least 1/2 of the people in that committee present before you can actually do anything. Fine.
I always like calling roll. I kind of wish we did that at the beginning of worship every Sunday. Who's here? Stand up.
It was like the worst thing in school. I hated that.
Really?
Yeah, I'm like, you got a list, go down the list, figure it out. I don't need to get up or even call my name, but I was one of those introverted people, so.
I like it. I have nostalgic memories about roll call. Point 6, setting meeting days. The date and time of the initial meeting of each legislative committee will be established by the Transitional Commission on Convening General Conference based on polling of members' availability. Subsequent to the initial meeting, Legislative Committee officers will set the dates and times of virtual meetings. Every effort will be made to ensure global participation in virtual Legislative Committee meetings. Members will be notified of such committee meetings at least 72 hours in advance. If circumstances dictate, a special virtual meeting may be called by the chair or by a majority of the members, in which case the 72-hour notice must be waived by a 2/3 electronic vote of members prior to the meeting. Notification of meeting times and dates will be conducted via electronic means. I'm going to read that again because I zoned out. Notification of meeting times and dates will be conducted via electronic means. Okay. If a delegate is unable to attend a legislative committee meeting, the head of the delegation should ensure that an alternate delegate attends in their place. Once the General Conference has convened, the Agenda Committee will determine committee meeting dates and times. So it sounds like there's an initial calendar that's scheduled, and then they move that based on the availability of delegates. There is going to be a mandatory, delegates that don't have access to electronic communication just can't participate in it. It's going to be so dependent on it. There's no way through snail mail to notify them or...
Yeah, no.
Yeah. So...
I guess it would be weird to me if they don't have the means to send an email or connect. I mean, most people have some kind of way to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah, there's nothing, you cannot do this global church thing the way we're trying to do it without modern technology.
Yeah.
Okay. Point 7, agenda. The virtual meeting notification will include a written agenda together with any materials prepared by the staff or others relating to that agenda. After the agenda for a committee meeting is published and distributed, no non-germane items, as determined by the chair, may be brought up during that meeting unless at least 2/3 of the members present agree to consider those items. This is one of those things where, like, it makes sense to me in theory, but as soon as you tell me we can't consider this is not germane to that just drives me nuts. Like, if I'm a delegate, if I'm participating, I think it's germane. Don't tell me it's not germane.
I have no strong feelings on that. I guess I would need examples to consider.
I know I've been in so many groups where somebody brings up like a really good point that actually kind of influences our work, but the chair says, actually, that's not what we're talking about right now. So sit back down. I might call on you later. So it happened at General Conference in Charlotte a few weeks ago. My mind is blank now. I just recall the bishop at the time saying that may or may not be a good point, but we're not talking about that right now. In which case, it's so phony. I don't know.
Yeah,
this is not how humans interact.
If you've got an agenda and you've got a limited amount of time, then I can understand.
Yes. Okay. Anything else before we go on?
I don't think so.
Okay. Point 8, effect of pre-conference actions. All actions of a legislative committee during virtual meetings prior to the General Conference are to be considered provisional, with the exception of the officers selected by the committee. When the legislative committees meet at the site of the General Conference, their first act of business should be to ratify the actions taken during pre-conference meetings. Each petition that is modified or proposed by the legislative committee should be ratified individually as finally modified or proposed. Such ratification does not preclude additional subsequent changes to the petition during the conference. Any modified petition that is not ratified will revert to its original form.
Okay, so all actions of the legislative committee during virtual meetings prior to the General Conference are to be considered provisional. So if they make any decisions like we want to pass this or we want to push this to the General Conference, this petition, that's not actually final until they all actually get together physically. Is that how I?
Yeah, that's how I read it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. I don't know why that matters, but I'm sure there's some reason.
I think there's just going to be a lot of things that change very quickly in the opening days of General Conference, so that there will be a lot of work that they did beforehand that things have changed and now they need to to augment very quickly. So they need to revise all the work that they did in light of new developments. And then they need to have that same maneuverability during the whole time at General Conference. That's kind of how I read it.
Okay.
Okay. Point 8.9. Bringing a matter to a vote. If the chair determines that a motion, petition, or amendment has been adequately debated, he or she may call for a vote on such a petition, motion, or amendment, and the vote will then be taken, unless the committee votes to continue debate. The vote on a motion to continue debate on any petition, motion, or amendment will be taken without debate. Okay, I think I understand it. This motion to continue debate must occur prior to the vote on such petition, motion, or amendment. That makes sense, if presented in a timely manner. A majority affirmative vote is required to continue debate. Members on their own initiative may, by a 2/3 vote, end debate and proceed to act on a motion, petition, or amendment, which is to call the question. So in the deliberations of the legislative committee, I don't think it sounds like the chair does not have to wait on someone to make a motion to end all discussion, move the question, anything like that. The chair can just discern, we've talked enough about it, let's bring it to a vote. But when they do that, there's an opportunity given for someone to say, no, we need to debate it more. Chair, take a vote. They vote. They can't argue about if they need to debate about it more. They just take the vote at that point. And if more than half the people say, no, we need to continue debate, then the chair is overruled. They can continue debate. Also, the chair can feel like we need to debate more. But if everybody else is fed up, they can say, hey, we need to move on. Chair, I call a question or whatever. And then if that vote passes by 2/3, then they can have their vote.
That's how I read it.
Great. Okay, very good. Point 10, public announcement of votes. The results and vote totals of votes taken by the committee on any non-procedural measure, petition, or motion, or amendment thereto must be announced publicly at the time of the vote and reported to the Secretary of the General Conference for presentation to the plenary body. Thought I was understanding what it was saying until... Okay, so none of these votes are going to be... Okay, so yeah, we already talked about the votes are not going to be... They're going to be provisional until you get to General Conference. So once these votes are finalized, that will only be at General Conference, and it will be announced to the plenary at General Conference.
Must be publicly announced at the time of the vote and reported to the Secretary of General Conference for presentation to the... Yeah, so that sounds like it's that final vote... Mm-hmm. Whenever they've actually gathered, that's when they announce it.
So we're not going to be getting rollouts of votes in the lead up to General Conference. It's just going to be one of the things at General Conference. We're not going to be hearing in the 2 months before, well, the one legislative committee met and they took a vote today, and here's what they'll be presenting. They might put some of that out, but that's not what this is addressing.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't imagine they're going to do that. Like, hey, we've decided this is going to go to the General Conference. Like we voted on this, it passes, or we voted on this, it didn't pass. I don't think they're going to give that information out beforehand. It'd be great if they did.
Ooh, they have open committee meetings thing. This is point 11. To the extent possible, both in-person and virtual meetings of the legislative committees will be open to the public.
That would be nice, so we can listen in on how our petitions are going.
Dude, I would really like that. I hope y'all do that. I would, put out a link. I don't need to talk. I just want to listen,
Oh, yeah, I don't think you have the option to talk. You just get to listen.
If you leave my microphone on, I am going to talk. But, man, that's really cool. I didn't see that before. Okay. Point 12, minutes of committee meetings. An accurate record, this is point A, an accurate record must be kept of the committee's actions in the form of minutes. These minutes, and where applicable, a minority report, should be submitted to the Secretary of the General Conference within 24 hours of a virtual meeting and by 10 p.m. on the day of the meeting at the site of General Conference. In addition to written minutes, the committee must make available a video or audio recording of any virtual meeting and copies of any materials offered during the debate in the committee. The committee written documents will remain available on the denominational website, and electronic versions of any document, petitions, or motions made or used throughout the General Conference will remain on the denominational website as archived for historical value and their legislative history value.
I feel like somebody's
This is
been
kind
listening.
of awesome.
Yeah, somebody's been listening to Plain Spoken.
Well, this was written before we even submitted our petitions on transparency or anything.
Yeah, we've been harping about transparency for a while.
Yeah. No, this is a fantastic. I'm really excited about this. We don't have to guess at so many things. We can just read it and know it and listen to it, see it. Yeah,
it's great. It's great.
Let it be known, I'm very happy with whoever wrote this. All right. Point B, the work of the legislative committee's meeting prior to the convening of the General Conference should be posted on the denominational website as the work progresses. That work should end 7 days before the convening of the General Conference. All work done by legislative committees prior to the General Conference will be compiled into a printed pre-conference workbook available to delegates electronically and in print the day before the opening session. So here's another difference between the United Methodist General Conference and how the GMC is doing it. The UMC General Conference puts out a pre-conference workbook 60 days beforehand that has everything. You're not going to have anything like that for the GMC. Well, okay, it's okay. The work of the legislative committees should be posted on denominational website as the work progresses. So you're going to have, it's not even going to be a pre-conference workbook. It's going to be just like report-ins, regular check-ins from each legislative committee, and then all of that will be compiled and formalized, and you'll only get that the day before General Conference. But it shouldn't be a big deal because you've been paying attention. You've been tracking all the developments leading up to that.
Yeah, I think that's what I was just going back and reading if it was just the printed version that was going to be available a day before. Okay, so all the work is going to be done 7 days before.
Concluded, yeah.
Yeah, so that gives them.
But they're doing the work continuously for
Right.
53 days before that, I think. So
I guess hypothetically they could be done before the 7 days.
But even if one legislative committee gets done before that time, I mean, so they're going to be, it sounds to me like they're going to be regularly rolling out. So before we were saying it sounded fictitious that they would be regularly rolling out content. But now it sounds to me, says the work of the legislative committees meeting prior to the General Conference should be posted on the denominational websites as the work progresses.
Okay.
So that says to me that they are rolling out regularly updates on the work of these legislative committees.
If they're posting it to the website and all of that stuff as they're going along, then we will find out whether our petitions pass or not and are going on to the General Conference beforehand.
This is so cool.
Yeah.
And I put together a petition that had like mandatory minimum standards for websites, and I was like, man, nobody's written anything like this, but they had. It was here, and it was saying you have to put it on the website as you do it. So I love knowing that what I imagined was not so fictitious, that somebody else imagines things like that. All right, we're at point C now. During the convening General Conference, any further changes made to petitions or topics assigned to legislative committees will be updated to the website and printed in the daily conference journal given to delegates each morning at the start of business. So this is very much like the Advanced Daily Christian Advocate. That's what the UMC uses, and it's a daily publication that's put out in print and digitally. But this is making clear, I think this would only be, they'll probably have it in print as well, which is why it's so important to submit this stuff by 10 o'clock every evening so that they can have it printed.
It says printed.
Yeah, okay.
Updated to the website and printed in the daily conference journal.
Thank you.
Given to delegates each morning at the start of business.
Okay, great. And then D is all versions will remain in the archives of the denominational website to preserve the historical and legislative historical value. So we're not going to be running into a situation where something happens and they followed incorrect procedure and then they delete the evidence of where it was. Everything's going to stay there for historical purposes, even if it makes things more complicated, which I think shows a lot of wisdom.
Yeah, good for them.
Yeah. All right, we're at 45 minutes. I wonder if we can cover. I think we can cover this next section on nominations and elections. Do you want to try and do that?
Yeah. Might as well. I don't feel like there's going to be a whole lot of
Do
weird
it.
stuff in here.
Why don't you lead us?
So 6 nominations and elections. The convening general conference will elect members to serve on the following committees and commissions individually by majority vote upon nomination by the nominations committee. Membership on a commission or council is not limited to general conference delegates. Okay. So these are, what is this?
Yeah, what are
Nominations
these committees?
and elections of who? This is for the committees. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Those are the committees before. This is how they get nominated.
Okay.
I think. Is that what you're...
This is not clear to me. I took it as my time to zone out for a second. And
Membership on a commission or council.
so are these like the ongoing commissions and councils after general conference? Surely not. This is a document about maybe what follows will make this clear.
Let's read the first one.
Okay.
Number 1, nomination process. Provisional annual conferences or districts will be encouraged to submit nominations and resumes to the committee at least 60 days prior to the general conference. In addition, individuals interested in serving on one of these bodies may directly submit their names and resumes to the committee at least 60 days prior to the general conference. The nominations committee will funnel the names of potential individual nominees to the relevant provisional annual conferences or district nominations committee for vetting before being considered. If those names were not submitted by a PAC or PD, Provisional Annual Conference or
Provisional district.
Okay. Each nominee may submit a brief biography of up to 100 words, which will be printed along with the nominee's name in any published slate of nominees.
So districts, conferences can nominate people to be sent. I didn't get much else out of that.
To a committee. So I assume it's these committees we just talked about.
Legislative committees?
Yeah.
But in order to be on legislative committees, you have to be a delegate. And it just said that you don't have to be a delegate to be on these committees, right?
Did it say that?
Yeah.
Membership on a commission or council is not limited to general conference delegates.
Right.
Okay, so what is this? What is a commission or council? Oh, hold on. Sorry, guys. So it must not be the committees. What are commissions?
Well, not the legislative committees. There might be other committees and commissions. Councils and commissions to be elected, it shows 0.7 down the Connectional Council, Commission on Evangelism, Commission on Discipleship. Oh, these, I think, are the ongoing commissions and committees of the church. These are the groups that are going to be operating after General Conference.
Okay, so these, have we not got to these? What page is that on?
That was on the very next page. That was on page 9 under 0.7. Councils and commissions to be elected.
Okay, so they're telling us what the nomination process is before we even get to what they're being nominated for.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
But by that, I'm being sarcastic.
Yeah, I know you are. But so what we're dealing with here is how it is that we're gonna have these ongoing committees and boards and commissions that operate on behalf with the authority of the whole church. How are we going to put people on them? And yeah, it makes clear it's not just delegates to General Conference who can be put on here. They can be recommended from all over the connection.
Okay, I'm going to read what these committees are first because it makes more sense in my head that we know what we're talking about before we even go into how they're elected.
Here they are. Go ahead.
So that's 7. Councils and commissions to be elected. A connectional council, if formed. B, Commission on Evangelism, Missions, and Church Planting, which is in reference to paragraph 705.1. C is a Commission on Discipleship, Doctrine, and Just Ministry, which is paragraph 705.2. D, Commission on Ministry, 705.3. E is Commission on Communications, 705.4. F, Commission on Finance, Administration, Pensions, and Benefits, which is 705.5. G is the Wesleyan Unity Commission, which is
great.
paragraph 522. Why is that great?
Because I want other Wesleyan denominations to join us, and I'm glad that we're going to have a group that's responsible for holding those conversations.
Okay. H, Commission on the General Conference, if formed. I, Global Episcopacy Committee, if formed and to be elected by the General Conference. And finally, J, Connectional Council on Appeals and Alternatives, which is paragraph 820.
Alternates.
What did I say?
Alternatives.
Oh, alternates. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So now we're going back up
Okay. So,
to point 2, I think.
yeah, representation. The Nominations Committee will take care to consider geographical, racial/ethnic, gender, and age diversity in the makeup of the committees and councils while also prioritizing members' gifts and experience. In casting their ballots, General Conference delegates should be mindful of the same values.
These same values, yes.
Of these same values. All right.
Anything to say about you love all this representation
Yeah, because I could care less.
stuff? Okay.
Number 3, Nominations Committee process. The Nominations Committee will publish a slate of nominees for each commission or council at least 30 days prior to the General Conference on the General Conference website.
Oh, so they're going to figure out all this stuff before we even get together for General Conference,
Yeah,
huh?
30 whole month.
Okay.
All right. 4, additional nominees. Once the nominees committee slate is published, additional persons may be nominated or may nominate themselves at least 14 days prior to the General Conference, including a 100-word biography. The Nominations Committee will vet these additional nominees with the appropriate PAC or PD if needed.
Annual conference or district, yeah.
The full slate of Nominations Committee nominees and additional nominees will be published in the pre-conference workbook available the day before the conference. These nominees by the Nominations Committee will be indicated by an asterisk. Asterisk.
There it is.
I've always called it asterisk.
Yeah, no, that's a common thing here regionally. Yeah.
Okay, you're just shaming me for being
Product of
podunk.
Nowata County.
Yeah.
Sorry, dude. I apparently am very persnickety about how someone says asterisk.
Asterisk.
Yeah.
Okay.
Asterisk.
Thank you, Nowata County.
Okay, so there's going to be official slate that's published 30 days prior to the General Conference. There's going to be biographies on each person, but also there's going to be additional people that can be nominated or can nominate themselves 14 days prior, and they'll have an asterisk by their name.
So the General Conference they're determining who's going to be on these committees. Is that right? Is that?
Yeah, I think so. I think they'll be voting on all the composition of these.
Okay. Oh, I mean, that only makes sense if they're presenting it to them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That was 5. Let's go to 6.
Okay.
Was that 5? No, that's okay. 5 is additional members. So we're on 5.
Oh, okay.
Additional members. Within 90 days following the election of the council or commissions, the Connectional Council is empowered to add additional members to any of the councils or commissions, including itself, in order to ensure both diversity and experience if needed.
Expertise.
Okay. Expertise if needed. The number of additional members may not exceed 20% of the membership of the council or commission. Respecting the needs to preserve the balance between the 7 lay and clergy members. So there's 7 lay and 7 clergy. We talked about this before.
Yeah, right.
Who rotate majorities each 6 years. The Connectional Council on Appeals shall not subject to this provision for additional members.
It will not be subject to the provision. So, yeah.
Okay, explain that because I zoned out that whole paragraph.
Well, so the Connectional Council on Appeals has to do with the judicial process, and it had these balancing things, and this is not going to be subject to the provision for additional members. So with all the other groups, I think what it just said is they can add additional members. The Connectional Council can add additional members. they will not have that ability with the Connectional Council on Appeals.
I guess I'm just not clear what all the councils and commissions do. So
I think the Connectional Council on Appeals was the isn't that the Supreme Court of the denomination?
I think so. We've been through so much stuff, and yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah,
it's
let's
the
run with
judicial
it.
one.
Yeah.
Okay. Number 6, the council and commission officers. Each committee, commission, or council will elect its own chairperson and such other officers as it deems necessary from among the members of the body. That makes sense. That's what all the other ones do. So,
okay. Well, we can pick up in part 7 next week. That's on page 9 out of total. Man, I was hoping we'd do this in 3 sessions, but it looks like it's going to be 4. Doggone it. 15 total pages, 16 total pages. So,
well, we're on 9, so we're getting there.
We're like halfway.
Yeah.
So we'll do this again next week. I'm going to the Heartland Annual Conference this weekend, and hopefully we'll be publishing this tomorrow, Thursday, on the day that I go and it begins. And then we'll record the next session next week. So if you have feedback on what we covered this week, really appreciated Clark Atkins reaching out last time. Clark, if we got something wrong, correct us. If somebody else knows, we're at plainspokenpod@gmail.com. We appreciate y'all going along with us. And then as y'all watch this process unfold, feel free to just get our attention and make sure that we see things where they're getting published and who's doing what. Sounds to be like a pretty different process than what we've had in the United Methodist Church. So I'm kind of excited to see how all this does. We have to be gracious. This is the first time they've done this. Everybody's new. Everybody's doing their best. So, be in particular mindful of John Lamperis, who signed up to be the general coordinator of the General Conference, and Diane Burnett and Lamar, I want to say Odom.
I was going to look and see, but his name was on the petition thing, and they've closed it, obviously.
Oh, okay. So there's just a lot of people doing a lot of good work, and it's their first time, and they're overwhelmed, and so pray for them. In fact, why don't we just end this one by praying for them? Father, we lift up to you those who are putting together the General Conference. We thank you for all the people serving on the legislative committees, and a lot of them are not even elected yet. We ask your provision and care for the Global Methodist Church as they try to do something new, something truly global that hasn't even been possible until recently. And we want to pray for those leading at the top and those leading in the middle and those leading at the bottom. It's easy for the church to become a thankless and ungracious place, and we pray that your grace would pervade everything, and that this new convening conference that meets, maybe everything's not going to be perfect in the lead up to it, but I just pray that as this sincere attempt towards transparency and integrity is made, that all the delegates and everybody watching can acknowledge and say, look how hard they're trying, and indeed when we finally get together, that the world would look upon us and say, look how they love one another. So Lord, may it be so. Choose to bless the work of our hands, that you would be glorified in the midst of the Global Methodists. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Lamar Oliver.
Not Odom, but Oliver. Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, friends, we thank you for hanging out with us. We're going to go lead our lives now, but we'll see you next week for this segment. And stay tuned for other stuff we're doing, because it's all really good. Why don't you watch every single thing that we do? All right. See ya.